times.
All right. Hey everyone, we are back for another episode of Life Possible with a Disability, and I have the honor of having Abi Winchester as my guest, slash interviewer. So Abi came up with this brilliant idea. I've been wanting to have her on the podcast of asking me some questions. Abigail is a student at the University of St. Augustine, Dallas campus. And I have some dear friends that are professors there, Professor Leanne Hoffman and Professor Keith McWilliams. I usually go there a year to speak to the OT students there, and sometimes to PT virtually. But yeah, Abi. And she's also friends with our dear Tom Simon, who is an ATP with New Motion out of Dallas. And so she's involved with some great human beings. Abi, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got involved in OT.
All right. So first of all, thank you guys for having me. So I'm originally from Pensacola, Florida, but I've lived in Texas most of my life. I started attending the University of St. Augustine at the Dallas campus in fall of 2020. So right in the middle of COVID. So that was quite an experience, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But, we've made it this far in a month. So April 22nd, I'll have my doctorate of occupational therapy. Fun times.
So much work.
And most recently, I've been working on my capstone project, which is about patient advocacy and education through the wheelchair process end to end, from prescription all the way to delivery and maintenance.
So. One of my favorite topics in the whole wide world. It's so important to understand that process, and you can't really advocate for yourself until you really understand the full process. And so education on that part is like kind of just one of quite a few topics that I'm totally passionate about. So thank you for doing that and taking an interest in that area. It's something so highly specialized, and so many OTs and PTs don't understand what it takes to get a complex rehabilitation type piece of technology, because it's not go to Walgreens and buy your off the shelf wheelchair. So much to it.
Right.
Okay.
It's so complex.
It is very complex, and it's easy to point fingers at the supplier, but and sometimes we make mistakes, no doubt, but the process is so difficult, from insurance and all the hoops that you have to jump through due to Medicare guidelines and, denials and just prolonging of things. So, all right, well, I think I'm ready to be the guest this time. So let's do this.
All right, here we go. So I would like for you to tell me about your first wheelchair. What was it like?
Wow. Okay, so that was back in 1987. And wheelchair custom lightweight chairs were kind of like in their infancy. So it wasn't really a thing, especially the materials we use now. So it was in aluminum. It wasn't very tightly configured. So anybody who's like first becoming a full-time wheelchair user, or even part-time, but especially full-time, you don't know your center of gravity yet, so they don't configure it too tightly, right? So it's kind of like a loose fitting, piece of clothing. It's probably wider than it needs to be. It's probably more boxy and that kind of thing. And besides the fact that as I mentioned, 35 plus years ago, the technology had an advance. So I had swing away footrests. You know what those are?
Oh.
But at the time I wasn't good at transferring, and I had to swing them away to get really close to the toilet or really close to the tub. So it did serve a purpose until I got stronger and figured out my center of gravity. So it was clunky. And it was, just looking back, it looks like a relic, just bad.
Wow. So how does it compare to your current chair?
Wow. So my current chair, especially because I have the privilege of working for New Motion, I get to work with all these ATPs. Like, I know the technologies that exist. Again, as we just spoke about, I know how to advocate for myself to get them, because insurance doesn't want to pay for titanium, carbon fiber. So my chair is now extremely, as a matter of fact, I may just back up for people who are watching and I'll explain for people who are listening, but this is a, carbon fiber back. It's a titanium frame with tattoos, so it's very pretty, unlike the other one. And then I have these Spinergy wheels with carbon fiber spokes. Everything is ultra lightweight. And if that's important because as a paraplegic, I take this chair in and out of the car multiple times a day. I fold up the frame and we're already overusing our shoulders, arms, and hands to compensate for the fact that we can't move our legs. So over time, if you were lifting a heavy chair in and out of a car, you're irreparably damaging your upper body, which might move you along to a power chair more quickly. And, I don't want that.
Right. That's much harder to transport and sometimes maneuver, right?
For sure. It's so this one's very maneuverable. It's very tightly configured in the front, so you can't really see, but there's a big taper, and my feet are sort of like tucked under, which makes my turning radius smaller. In that old chair with the swingway footrest that were slightly out, like I would bump, like you try to turn around in a tight space, you're just gonna like hit everything. In this little chair, and my center of gravity is very also tightly configured because at this point, and within a few years after becoming a full-time wheelchair user, you figure out your center of gravity.
Right.
And if it's properly configured, your hand is going to fall into the hub, which it makes your push more efficient and doesn't damage your shoulder. So it's like night and day.
Yeah, for sure. So how many times have you been through the process of getting a new wheelchair?
So almost every 5 years, kind of that's the Medicare guideline, right? 5 to 6. So probably 7 times, 6 or 7 times. So each iteration. Now I will say wheelchair users get stuck sometimes, and there were a couple of times in between there I was like, I don't want to change anything because changing the chair is scary. It's like getting a new pair of shoes that are really uncomfortable versus the comfy shoes that you've been breaking in for years. And you're hesitant to get rid of those old comfy shoes. A wheelchair is like exactly the same. So there were times where I'm like, I want the exact same one. But then about 10 years ago, when I started working for New Motion, and a little bit before that, I got peer pressured by other wheelchair users into like, that's a grandma chair. Like, what the heck? Like, you need a fixed front. And I was like, well, how will I get, because getting it out of the tub, that means that my transfer was this much further away. So they shamed me into, making it a more sporty looking, almost invisible because it's so tightly configured and tucked in. People see me and not this big clunky chair, which is emotionally important to me. So yeah, probably about 6 or 7 times.
So, what were your experiences like each time? Like, what did you learn from time to time, or
Yeah.
all of that?
So one time I tried to change the frame, and I use a Permaville as Tylite. Tylite is a brand of manual chair, and they had this dual tube. So I have an open frame, so the foot pedal is just like a one metal tube that goes down, and there's no crossbars underneath. Mm-hmm. Well, this one was the one that the ATP sort of like, it was the newest, hottest thing out in wheelchairs, and it had one crossbar, which gave it some support, which meant that it was a little more lightweight because the front tube wasn't as thick. So I was like, sure, I'll try it. Well, we order it and I get it in, and I realized that the way I transfer into my car, I couldn't get the wheelchair in my car. And I struggled. It felt like I had started over learning how to transfer, bleeding, crying, just tearing up my dashboard. And I struggled for multiple months. But, that was a mistake because the ATP and I didn't think about, okay, if we're going to change the frame of the chair, she needs to test this out in all the environments.
Right.
So we both learned a lot. And I did not keep that chair.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What do you wish you would have known at your first wheelchair eval that you know now?
everything takes a little bit of getting used to. Maybe I would have um, pushed a little harder for them to narrow it. I mean, I think that I could advocate for myself, that I didn't have to 100% listen to what the therapist said.
Right.
That my voice mattered. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they just show up and, whatever the therapist or whatever the physician even recommended or what the ATP recommended, we trust them because they're the ones that are certified. They're supposed to know
Mm-hmm.
best. And sometimes it's hard in that 45 minutes or an hour for them to get the whole picture of who you are and what your needs are.
For
So I
sure.
think it's good for us to have the education to advocate.
Yeah. And if you have to draw the person out, I think as a early on, new wheelchair user or within those even first couple of chairs, you might want to. The therapist is going to have to draw their voice out. Like, what do you think about this? Like, how will this work for you? Because we're all in a time crunch these days, and therapists have they've got to see the patient, finish, document, and so I think it's if it takes a couple of appointments to get it right, I think you're better off in the long run.
I agree. I agree. I wish we had, all the time and resources in the world to make that happen.
Yeah, me too.
Um, do you have any helpful tips, tricks, or resources for people that are going through the process the first time?
Yeah, so I would say, the as we already spoke about, speak up. Try the chair in every environment you're in, and so take it in your car and go to your office or go to the grocery store. I just think that if you're just in a mat eval room in a clinic somewhere, and you don't go outside and you're going to miss some things. So I think being really thorough before you make a decision. Also, you can help expedite the process by getting in touch with your primary care, because a lot of the delays in getting your equipment come from, we asked for chart notes or we asked for a prescription from your doctor and we didn't get it in a timely manner. And yes, it is the job of the supplier, to do that, but the doctor's office is getting 150 requests a day, and something coming from the customer/patient themselves sometimes can speed that process significantly. So advocating for yourself, both in the clinic and with your doctors and with your insurance company.
For sure. For sure. Something else like I could recommend is, so in my resource I talk about the whole timeline of the process, and
Mm-hmm.
having that expectation there, because most people, obviously they need this piece of equipment and
Mm-hmm.
they need it now, but
Mm-hmm.
in reality the timeline is 3 to 6 months, and that's usually not what you want to not what you want to hear, not what you would expect. So
No,
trying to
unfortunately, the powers that be that hold the purse strings, they probably have never even known somebody who used a custom wheelchair or needed the device for mobility. And they just, I mean, I hate to say that they don't care, but their game is to make it last. The longer they drag it out, the more they keep their money in their pocket. And that's just the harsh reality of it. So you might be in a loaner chair for a while or fixing up your old chair, waiting on that chair. But yeah, but anything you have more power than you think. So don't forget, that would be my main piece of advice.
Awesome. My next question: have you ever abandoned the use of any equipment because it wasn't what you expected or it didn't quite work the way you needed to? I know you already said that you rejected a
It was
piece of
only that
equipment.
it was only that one time, right? And now a lot of times a person might want to immediately abandon a piece of equipment, but like I mentioned earlier, change is hard, and you got to give it many, many months to get used to it. A lot of people just get back into their old chair, the new one sits in the corner until the old one just literally can't function anymore. And I'm guilty of that myself. But you got to push yourself, right? But after months of trying and modifying and working with the team to try to make it work, there are times when it just doesn't work the way that you thought it was going to. I had tons of guilt about that. That's not my style. I'm not a big complainer. Um, okay, I'm more of a complainer, and it's more my style at 54 than it was at 19. but yeah, but I mean, I felt bad about it, but it didn't work with my life. And, so eventually I did, but that was the only time. I will say to people, give it lots of time because your body will adjust.
Right. That's good.
Mhm.
Um, do you believe that in general that more equipment abandonment could be avoided if there were more educational resources out in the world?
Yeah, 100%. I think that the more that you know about custom rehab and the reason that people configure the chair the way that they do, or don't, would, some things we do because as an industry, CRT, whether that's the therapist, the ATP, or whoever, they're trying to prevent future problems, right? So it might be slightly uncomfortable in the moment to have a custom molded back that makes you feel off balance, but it's holding you midline because they're trying to prevent future skeletal deformities, and
Right.
and that could take a little bit of getting used to. So it's like you could go back to the old way that you did it, but you'll suffer the consequences for that later. And there is a happy medium there into being not too uncomfortable, but being willing to stretch yourself in a direction that's going to prevent future issues.
Right. That's extremely important because posture itself can affect so many different aspects of your health.
That reminds me of Professor Leanne Hoffman, who is the positioning guru. She's 24-hour positioning. She talks about and try, because even when you're out of the chair, there are things you can do to prevent some of those skeletal deformities that come with, like me crossing my legs, for instance, for all this time. Not good for
Right.
my, yeah, right. I try. I try.
Yeah, but you're comfortable.
Yeah,
So,
the funny thing about that you want to know is because in those early days of the chairs where I didn't have a good sense of center of gravity, crossing my legs helped me feel like that I was more stable.
interesting. So you even crossed your legs when you had swing away footrests?
I did.
Or
Yeah,
no?
I did. I did.
Wow.
Yeah, and I wear a lot of dresses and stuff because I have to do an intermittent catheterization, so I don't wear pants, and so it was also ladylike, But in addition, I realized later on because I was like, God, I was making a concerted effort to not cross, and I would uncross when I was sitting still, but almost as soon as I would be mobile and moving, I noticed that I would recross because I felt the midline.
Mhm.
But I had to think about that. It wasn't conscious; it was subconscious.
Right. So what aspects of the wheelchair process do you think the population needs to know more about?
I think that I don't think they realize the amount of documentation that we have to have from your medical providers. Gosh, I mean, the form is 16 pages long. And to get into a custom chair, you have to have, chart notes that back up the need for that. You have to have what they call a face to face. So there's a document that the physician has to sign, and the appointment has to be solely for the purpose of configuring the wheelchair. It can't be like, oh, I have a backache. Oh, by the way, I need a wheelchair. And people don't know. I mean, there are 100 hoops to jump through. And then if things aren't, just right, you're going to get a denial. Then you have another mountain of paperwork they're going to ask for to undo it. So as much as you can do to help that process, you're helping yourself in the long run. So I used to go pick up paperwork for customers or go to doctor's office, and the doctor's office wouldn't understand what the face to face was. It's the date that they sign the evaluation. They're like, well, I didn't see that person face to face. That's the wording of Medicare, but it's extremely confusing. They're like, well, that's fraud. And I'm like, actually, that's not the definition of a face to face. So education is key, not just for the person ordering the chair and the person that's going to live it, use it as their mobility, but educating people who aren't medical professionals, even doctors that aren't familiar with this process.
Yeah. So is there anything further that you would like the either the physicians or the clinicians to know aside from, the definition of like a face to face or
Mhm.
any anything they
Yeah,
can do
I
to help?
think that Yeah, you have to rule out, this is so nonsensical, but I'm paralyzed. We still have to rule out that I can't use like a cane or a rolling walker or a lesser piece of equipment. That's the
Wow.
dumbest thing I've ever heard. But you do. But like you have to rule out the reason. So it takes a lot of justification. It's not just because your doctor said so. And that's because there was a fraud and abuse, that happened. And so yeah, but there's a reason for it. It's just that now people that need the technology in a timely manner can't get it.
Yeah. That's crazy. Is there any final thoughts you would like to leave us with on any of those topics?
Well, for first of all, like I just love that OT students and OTs, PTs in general, that they become like CRT champions, so complex rehabilitation champions, right? So they really get why we need it and what we need. And if you guys didn't exist, we'd be in a world of trouble. But I would say like, look it up, look up complex rehabilitation technology versus durable medical equipment. There's a difference, right? We fall
There
under that
is.
umbrella officially, but we're a totally different animal. So knowledge is power for the clinician, for the customer, for the your healthcare provider. So yeah, like, and you don't underestimate the importance of preventing a wound or future skeletal deformity and having the right piece of equipment. So
Yeah. That's awesome. All right, Karen, those were all my questions I had for you.
well, those are such good questions, Abby. Yeah, this is something that you and I both write about, and that we try to get out into the world. And so, I would say for anybody who's listening or watching, and you're having trouble with the process of either getting a replacement chair or a new chair, I'll have Abby's information in the show notes, and you can always reach out to me. And it kind of depends on where you are, but maybe we can point you in the right direction. So, Abby, thank you.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed being here with you.
Me too. Finally, we had quite a few obstacles to get to this day, but it was well worth it. And I
Yes.
will see you soon in Dallas, and maybe at your graduation. So,
Oh, yay. How exciting.
I know. All right, Abby, I'll talk to you soon.